Imagine waking up every day with a calm mind, untouchable by chaos, negativity, or fear. How would your life transform if criticism, setbacks, or external noise couldn't disturb your inner peace? Today, we'll explore 10 transformative Buddhist principles that teach us to build this fortress of tranquility. Along the way, I'll share real-life stories, practical applications, and deep insights that will inspire you to cultivate resilience. No matter what life throws your way, stay with us to discover how you can achieve this unshakable peace. Once upon a time, in a tranquil village nestled between rolling hills and lush forests, there lived a young seeker named Ananda. Despite the natural beauty surrounding him, Ananda's heart was heavy. He felt trapped, overwhelmed by the noise of the world, relentless criticism, unending chaos, and the echo of his own fears. Every night, as the village slept peacefully, Ananda lay awake, staring at the stars, yearning for an inner peace he had never known. One evening, as the golden sun dipped behind the hills, casting a warm glow over the village, Ananda made a decision. He packed a small bundle of belongings, left a note for his family, and set out on a journey to find the legendary Master Suddha, a teacher renowned for his ability to transform even the most troubled minds into still, unshakable calmness. For days, Ananda traveled through forests alive with birdsong, across rivers that whispered secrets of time, and up mountains whose peaks kissed the clouds. Finally, he reached a serene monastery perched on a hilltop, where Master Suddha taught his disciples beneath the shade of an ancient Bodhi tree. When Ananda arrived, he knelt before the master, his voice trembling with both exhaustion and hope. "Master," he began, "I am tormented by the storms within me. Criticism wounds me, chaos drowns me, and my fears hold me captive. I wish to find a peace so deep, no storm can disturb it. Teach me how." Master Suddha looked at him with eyes that seemed to hold the universe itself, calm, knowing, and infinitely kind. A gentle smile spread across his face. As he motioned for Ananda to sit, the other disciples gathered quietly, intrigued by the young seeker's earnestness. "The peace you seek," the master said, his voice as steady as a mountain stream, "is not found in a single step or a fleeting moment of clarity. It is a path, a discipline, and a transformation. But if your heart is open and your will is strong, I will teach you 10 principles. Each will be a step, and with each step, you will find yourself closer to the unshakable calm you desire." Ananda leaned in, his heart pounding. The other disciples exchanged knowing smiles, for they too had once been like him, lost and searching. Master Suddha continued, his voice carrying the weight of wisdom. "These principles are not merely lessons to be learned, but truths to be lived. Each will challenge you, and each will free you in ways you cannot yet imagine. Are you ready to begin?" Ananda nodded, his eyes filled with determination. For the first time in years, a spark of hope lit up his heart. And so began a journey not just for Ananda, but for anyone who seeks peace amid the storms of life. Each principle would unfold like a petal of a lotus, revealing the essence of serenity, one layer at a time. Would Ananda be able to embrace these truths and transform his life forever? What were the 10 principles that could lead to a peace so profound it could withstand any storm? Stay with the story, and you, too, may find yourself walking alongside Ananda, discovering the keys to unshakable calmness in a chaotic world. 1. Find your North Star. Master Suddha gazed at Ananda with a serene expression, his voice steady and warm. "Before you can find peace, you must first find your direction. The first principle is this: find your North Star. Without purpose, you are like a boat adrift in a stormy sea, easily tossed by the waves, powerless against the currents. To find peace, you must know where you are going." He pulled a blank scroll from his robes, its pristine surface reflecting the golden light of the morning sun. Handing it to Ananda, along with an ink brush, the master instructed, "Write your deepest values and aspirations. This scroll will be your map, Whenever you feel lost or overwhelmed by the noise of life, return to it. It will remind you of what truly matters." Ananda stared at the scroll, his mind racing. What were his deepest values? What did he truly want from life? The blankness of the page seemed to mirror the uncertainty within him. How could he reduce the chaos of his thoughts into simple words? That evening, as the village below the monastery fell silent, Ananda climbed to a quiet hilltop. The sky above was a sea of stars, their light shimmering against the inky darkness. He sat beneath a tree, the scroll unrolled before him, and gazed at the heavens. The vastness of the night sky both humbled and inspired him, and he felt the beginnings of clarity stirring in his heart. First, his hand trembled as he lifted the brush, hesitant to mark the pristine surface of the scroll. But as he closed his eyes and took a deep breath, his mind grew still. Slowly, words began to emerge, simple yet profound. Kindness, simplicity, peace. These were not just abstract concepts. They were the essence of the life he wished to lead. Ananda paused, his heart brimming with emotion. The act of putting his values into words felt like uncovering a truth he had always known but had never fully recognized. His brush moved again, to help others find peace, to live a life of integrity, to cherish simplicity. When he finally set the brush down, the scroll was no longer blank. It held a piece of his soul, a reflection of the person he aspired to become. Ananda looked at the words, his chest filling with a quiet but profound strength. For the first time, he felt as though he had a compass, a guiding star to light his way through the storms of life. The next morning, he presented the scroll to Master Suddha. The master read it in silence, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You have found your North Star," he said, handing the scroll back. "Keep it close. Ananda, this is not just a declaration. It is a promise to yourself. As you walk the path of life, the storms will come. When they do, this will remind you of who you are and what you stand for." Ananda nodded, clutching the scroll tightly. In that moment, he realized that finding his North Star was not the end of the journey, but the beginning. It was a foundation upon which every step forward would be built. The clarity he now felt was like the light of dawn breaking through a long and restless night. Over the following weeks, Ananda carried the scroll with him everywhere he went. Whenever doubt crept in or fear clouded his mind, he would unroll it and read the words he had written. Each time, the same feeling of strength and purpose would flood through him, as though the guiding star within him shone brighter than ever. In time, the scroll became more than just a tool. It became a part of him. Its lessons wove themselves into his thoughts, his actions, and his decisions. Ananda realized that finding his North Star was not just about writing words on a page. It was about living those words every day. And so, as Ananda continued his journey with Master Suddha, he carried his North Star not just in his hands, but in his heart. It was a beacon of light that would guide him through every challenge, every fear, and every storm that life had yet to bring. 2. Become untouchable. Ananda's training was not only a test of discipline but also a trial of resilience. The monastery, perched serenely atop a hill, often became the target of villagers' scorn. Some saw the monks as dreamers, wasting their lives in search of peace. They would gather near the monastery's gates, hurling insults, their voices echoing in the crisp. "Look at them," one villager jeered, pointing at Ananda as he swept the courtyard. "Fools who think they're above the world. What use is all this peace when life demands action?" The laughter of the crowd cut through Ananda like the sharp edge of a blade. He felt his cheeks flush with anger, his heart pounding with a mixture of shame and indignation. How dare they mock a path they didn't understand? He clenched the broom tightly, imagining hurling a fiery redo. But before the words could leave his lips, a hand rested gently on his shoulder. Ananda turned to see Master Suddha, his calm, steady gaze meeting a why? Master Suddha's expression softened, and he gestured for Ananda to follow him. The two walked to a nearby stream that flowed quietly beneath the shade of towering trees. The sound of the water was soothing, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted. T. And H. Master Sud. Ananda St. Master Suddha straightened, his gaze sharp now, cutting through Ananda's confusion. "No one can hurt you without your consent," he said, his voice steady as stone. "It is not their words that harm you, but your choice to hold them close. If you wish to find peace, Ananda, you must learn to control your reactions. The world will throw storms at you, but the untouchable is one who." That night, Ananda sat alone under the Bodhi tree, the master's words echoing in his mind. He closed his eyes, replaying the villagers' insults. His body tensed as if preparing for battle. But then he remembered the leaves on the stream. He pictured each insult landing on the water. Floating G. The exercise was harder than he anticipated. Each word seemed to grip his heart, pulling him back into anger and frustration. But Ananda persisted, again and again imagining the stream carrying the insults far from him. Hours passed before he opened his eyes, the night air cool and still around him. Though the anger had not fully left him, he felt a small shift, as if a crack of light had appeared in the darkness. Ananda Pa. Without a word, the villagers exchanged glances, their laughter fading into confusion. One muttered, "Does he not hear us?" Another said, "Or does he simply N?" Ananda heard them but smiled inwardly. He wasn't ignoring them, he was mastering himself. Over time, Ananda's practice bore fruit. He became a fortress of calm, unshaken by the storms of the outside world. Insults, once piercing arrows, now felt like feathers brushing against his skin. The power of those words wasn't in their sound but in his response, and he had stripped them of their power. One day, as Ananda swept the courtyard, a boy from the village approached him cautiously. "My father says you are foolish," the boy said, his voice small but curious. "He says peace is useless in the real world." Ananda looked at the boy, his face calm but kind. "Do you believe him?" he asked gently. The boy hesitated, then shook his head. "No," he admitted. "But why don't you fight back when people say such things? Doesn't it hurt?" Ananda knelt to meet the boy's eyes. "It used to," he said honestly, "but I've learned that when someone speaks unkindly, it reflects their own struggles, not mine. Their words are like a gift. If I don't accept it, it remains theirs, not mine." The boy frowned thoughtfully, then smiled. "I think that makes you strong," he said before running back to the village. That evening, Master Suddha called the students together beneath the Bodhi tree. "Today, we will speak of storms," he said. "The world is full of them, insults, failures, disappointments. These storms cannot be avoided, nor can they be controlled. But what you can control is how you weather them." He turned to Ananda. "You have faced the storm of criticism, and yet you remain standing. What have you learned?" Ananda rose, his voice steady and clear. "I have learned that peace is not the absence of storms, but the mastery of stillness within them. I am no longer moved by the noise of the world, for I see it as just that, noise. My peace is mine to guard, and I will not give it away." Master Suddha nodded, his expression proud. "You have taken the first step to becoming untouchable. Ananda, remember, the strongest fortress is not built of stone, but of a calm and unshaken mind." Word of Ananda's transformation spread throughout the village. The same people who had once mocked him now spoke of his unshakable calmness. They came not to jeer but to ask questions, seeking the secret to his peace. "How do you do it?" one villager asked. "How do you remain so calm when the world tries to provoke you?" Ananda smiled softly. "The world can only provoke you if you allow it to, but when you realize that your peace is yours to guard, the world's storms can pass without touching you. It's not the storm outside that matters, it's the calm within." The villager left in deep thought, and Ananda returned to his work. He had discovered a truth more powerful than any insult. more enduring than any storm, that true strength lay not in fighting the world, but in mastering oneself. 3. Transform insults into strength. It was midday when Ananda was sweeping the monastery courtyard, the rhythm of his broom a soothing meditation in itself. The sun was high, casting golden rays on the ancient stones, and the air was filled with the chirping of distant birds. The peace of the moment was shattered when a man from the village approached, his face flushed with anger. "You!" the man barked, pointing a calloused finger at Ananda. "You think yourself better than us, don't you? Hiding away on this hill, playing at wisdom while we toil below." Ananda looked up, startled by the man's tone. The man didn't pause, his voice rising to a shout. "You're nothing but a coward, afraid of the real world. You have no idea what it means to face life's struggles. You're a fraud." The insult stung, as harsh words often do, but Ananda had learned from his training. He stood still, steadying his breath as he recalled Master Suda's teachings. Instead of anger, he let curiosity rise in its place. He saw the man's face, lined with frustration, and wondered what pain had driven him to speak such words. With deliberate calm, Ananda placed his broom aside, stepped forward, and bowed deeply. "Thank you for your words," he said, his voice steady. "They show me where I must grow." The man froze, his mouth half open in confusion. He had expected resistance, maybe even anger, but not gratitude. Without another word, the man turned and walked away, shaking his head as if trying to make sense of what had just happened. Later that evening, Ananda recounted the encounter to Master Suda. The master's face lit with a subtle smile, his eyes glinting with approval. "You have learned well, Ananda," he said. "Insults are gifts, opportunities to practice patience, humility, and self-reflection. When someone throws fire at you, you have two choices: you can catch it and burn, or you can let it pass, leaving you unharmed. Today, you chose wisely." In the days that followed, Ananda reflected on the master's words. He began to see insults not as attacks, but as mirrors held up to his own insecurities. Each harsh word, he realized, was an opportunity to examine himself more deeply. "What about the insult bothered me?" he asked himself after each encounter. "Did it touch a truth I'm afraid of, or did it simply challenge my pride?" This self-examination became a practice in itself, a way for Ananda to transform every insult into a tool for personal growth. When someone called him weak, he questioned whether there was truth in it. Could he grow stronger not by fighting back, but by strengthening his patience and resolve? When someone mocked his simple lifestyle, he considered whether he was clinging to pride about his choices, instead of living them humbly and authentically. One day, as Ananda worked in the gardens, a group of children ran up to him, laughing. One boy, emboldened by the crowd, shouted, "Why do you waste your time planting vegetables? Real men make money, not mud pies." The other children burst into laughter, pointing at Ananda with mocking grins. The boy stood tall, proud of his insult. Ananda wiped his hands on his robes and knelt down to meet the boy's eyes. "Do you know why I plant these vegetables?" he asked, his voice kind but firm. The boy shrugged, suddenly uncertain. "No. Why?" "I plant them so that others can eat," Ananda said. "Even those who mock me. Do you think that is a waste?" The boy's face turned red as he looked down at the ground. Ananda smiled softly. "We all plant seeds, with our words and our actions. Choose wisely what you plant, for it will grow." The boy nodded silently, and the other children followed him as he walked away, their laughter replaced by thoughtful whispers. Ananda's ability to transform insults into strength did not go unnoticed. Villagers began to speak of him with a mix of awe and curiosity. How could someone face ridicule and respond with such grace? People who had once mocked him now sought his counsel, hoping to understand the source of his calm. One day, an elder from the village came to the monastery and found Ananda sitting beneath the Bodhi tree. "I've watched you for months," the elder said. You face criticism without anger, insults without pride. How do you do it? Ananda smiled, gesturing for the elder to sit beside him. When someone insults me, he said, I see it as a gift. If their words hold truth, I use them to grow. If they do not, they pass through me like the wind. Either way, they do not harm me. The elder furrowed his brow. But doesn't it hurt? Don't you ever feel angry? I used to, Ananda admitted. But anger is a fire that consumes only the one who holds it. Instead of letting it burn me, I let it light the way to greater understanding. Each insult is a lesson, if we are willing to learn. The elder nodded slowly, his expression softening. You've given me much to think about, he said before rising to leave. Master Suddha often spoke of the strength found in humility, to stand firm in the face of insults. He told his students, is to build a mountain within yourself. Each time you refuse to let harsh words shake you, the mountain grows taller and stronger. And when the mountain stands high, no storm can reach its peak. Ananda took these words to heart. Over time, he noticed that his reactions to insults had changed. What once would have angered or hurt him now felt like waves breaking harmlessly against the shore. His peace was no longer something fragile to be guarded. It was an unshakable foundation, built from the very stones that others had thrown at him. One evening, as Ananda walked through the village, he encountered the man who had insulted him weeks before. The man looked at him with a mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. I don't understand you, the man said, stopping in his tracks. I insulted you in front of everyone, yet you thanked me. Why? Ananda paused, meeting the man's gaze with calm eyes. Because your words helped me see my own pride, he said. They gave me a chance to practice humility, and for that, I am grateful. The man blinked, stunned by Ananda's honesty. But I was trying to hurt you, he said. Why would you thank me for that? Ananda smiled. Pain is a teacher, if we let it be. Your words were sharp, yes, but they revealed where I still had work to do. Instead of resenting you, I chose to learn from you. The man stood silently for a moment, then nodded. I see now, he said quietly. You're stronger than I thought. Ananda's ability to transform insults into strength became one of his most powerful teachings. He showed others that even the harshest words could be tools for growth, that every insult carried the potential for self-discovery. Through his example, he proved that strength was not found in retaliation, but in the courage to look inward and transform pain into wisdom. In time, the villagers no longer saw Ananda as someone to mock, but as a source of inspiration, a living reminder that even the harshest storms could be weathered with grace. And for Ananda, every insult became a stepping stone, lifting him higher on the path to unshakable peace. For rise above gossip. As the morning light filtered through the monastery's windows, Ananda sat in deep meditation alongside his fellow students. The quiet hum of nature surrounded them, the rustling of leaves, the distant chirping of birds, a soundscape of peace. But even within this tranquility, a storm brewed in Ananda's mind. Whispers had reached him, carried on the wind like invisible thorns. He's not serious about his training, one voice had said. He's just here for the appearance of wisdom, another had chimed. The words clung to Ananda like a shadow, unsettling his heart. Despite his best efforts, the gossip pierced his concentration, dragging him from the stillness he sought. The thought that his dedication could be questioned was like a stone in his chest. That evening, unable to bear the weight of the rumors, Ananda approached Master Suddha. The master was seated beneath the ancient Bodhi tree, his expression serene, as if he could sense the turmoil in Ananda's heart even before a word was spoken. Master, Ananda began, his voice heavy with frustration. There are rumors about me. They say I'm not serious about my training, that I lack commitment. These words, they wound me deeply. How can I continue when my intentions are doubted? Master Suddha turned his calm gaze toward Ananda, a faint smile playing on his lips. Ananda, he said gently, do you see the shadow cast by this tree? Ananda nodded, his eyes following the long shadow stretching across the ground as the sun set behind them. Can the shadow touch you? The master asked. Ananda furrowed his brow, confused. No, master, he replied. A shadow cannot harm me. Exactly, said Master Suddha, his voice steady and clear. Others' opinions of you are like shadows. They cannot touch you unless you choose to let them. If you chase every shadow, you will exhaust yourself. Instead, stay true to your values, and your actions will speak louder than their words. Ananda sat quietly, absorbing the master's wisdom. His thoughts, however, still swirled with doubt. But master, he asked, what if their words spread and others begin to believe them? Won't that harm me in the end? Master Suddha's expression softened. The truth, like the sun, cannot be hidden for long. Stay rooted in your practice, Ananda, and let the light of your actions dispel the shadows of gossip. Time will reveal what is true. Determined to heed his master's advice, Ananda refocused on his training. Each morning, he rose before dawn, joining the other students in meditation. He poured his energy into every task, whether sweeping the courtyard, tending the gardens, or assisting his fellow monks. Whenever the whispers reached his ears, he reminded himself of the master's words. Shadows cannot touch you. At first, it was a struggle. The rumors seemed to grow louder, like a storm threatening to engulf him. But instead of retaliating or defending himself, Ananda practiced letting the words pass through him like wind through the branches of a tree. He pictured each rumor as a cloud, drifting across the sky, temporary and weightless. Over time, Ananda noticed something remarkable. The more he ignored the gossip, the less it seemed to matter. The storm of words began to lose its power, like flames dying without fuel. His heart, once weighed down by others' opinions, felt lighter, and in that lightness, he found a strength he hadn't known he possessed. One afternoon, while Ananda was tending to the monastery's garden, two students approached him. Their expressions were sheepish, their voices hesitant. Ananda, one of them began, we want to apologize. We were the ones who started the rumors about you. Ananda paused, setting down his tools. He turned to face them, his gaze calm but curious. Why did you do it? He asked, his tone free of accusation. The students exchanged nervous glances before one of them spoke. We were jealous, he admitted. You've always been so composed, so diligent in your training. It made us feel inadequate. Spreading rumors was our way of bringing you down to our level. Ananda's heart ached at their words, but not out of anger. He saw their pain, their insecurity, and understood that their actions had not been about him at all. They had been fighting their own shadows, and he had simply been caught in the crossfire. You don't need to bring others down to lift yourselves up, Ananda said gently. We are all here to learn and grow. The path is hard enough without us turning on one another. Let's walk it together. The students nodded, visibly relieved by Ananda's forgiveness. They left the garden with lighter hearts, and Ananda returned to his work, the sun warming his back. Master Suddha later approached Ananda, his eyes filled with quiet pride. You have done well, he said, by responding to their actions with understanding instead of anger. You have risen above gossip. Do you see now, Ananda, how your calmness has silenced their words? Ananda nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. It's as you said, Master. The truth, like the sun, reveals itself in time. Master Suddha placed a hand on Ananda's shoulder. Remember this lesson well. In life, there will always be those who speak of you without understanding. But their words cannot touch the truth of who you are. Only you can decide how much power to give them. From that day on, Ananda carried himself with quiet confidence. The rumors faded, their echoes replaced by admiration for his unwavering composure. Villagers who once gossiped about him now sought his advice. drawn to the calmness that radiated from him like sunlight. One day, an elder from the village approached Ananda. "How do you stay so calm when others speak ill of you?" the elder asked. "Doesn't it bother you?" Ananda smiled softly. "It used to," he admitted. "But I realized that their words were never about me. They were reflections of their own struggles, their own shadows. By staying true to my path, I've learned that the only opinion that truly matters is the one I hold of myself." The elder nodded thoughtfully, his eyes glimmering with newfound understanding. "You've taught me something important today," he said before walking away. Ananda's journey taught him that rising above gossip was not about silencing others, but about silencing the doubts within himself. He learned to let his actions speak louder than words, to trust in the truth of his intentions, and to see gossip not as a threat, but as an opportunity to practice resilience. Through this lesson, Ananda became a beacon of strength, a reminder that no storm of words could shake the foundation of a life built on truth and integrity. And as he continued his path, he carried with him the quiet confidence of one who had risen above the shadows. 5. Guard your mind. One serene evening, under the soft hues of a setting sun, Master Suddha led Ananda to an untended garden tucked away behind the monastery. The garden, once vibrant with life, was now a tangled mess of weeds, its beauty choked by neglect. The air was heavy with the scent of overgrowth, and the ground, covered in brambles, seemed almost impenetrable. "This," Master Suddha said, gesturing at the chaotic scene, "is what your mind looks like when you allow negativity to grow unchecked." Ananda stared at the garden, his chest tightening at the comparison. He thought of the doubts, fears, and moments of anger he'd harbored recently, the judgments he'd passed on himself, the worries that had clouded his thoughts. Was his mind truly this overrun? "Tomorrow," the master continued, "you will begin clearing this garden. As you remove the weeds, you will understand what it means to guard your mind. Let this task teach you the discipline of tending to both the soil and the soul." The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the monastery, Ananda set to work. Armed with a small spade and a basket, he knelt on the ground, pulling out weeds one by one. The task was grueling. Some roots ran deep, resisting his every effort to uproot them. Thorns pricked his fingers, and sweat dripped from his brow. Yet as he worked, he couldn't help but reflect on Master Suddha's words. "Are my thoughts like these weeds?" he wondered. "Do they grow unchecked, tangling my mind and overshadowing the good within me?" As the hours passed, Ananda began to see parallels between the garden and his own inner world. The weeds reminded him of his fears, the ones that crept in quietly but grew rapidly if ignored. The brambles were like his self-doubts, wrapping around his confidence and suffocating it. Each clump of tangled roots mirrored the negative patterns of thinking he had allowed to take hold. On the second day, as Ananda continued his work, he noticed something beneath the overgrowth. The soil was still rich and fertile. Small shoots of wildflowers and herbs struggled to break free from the stranglehold of the weeds. It was a reminder that beauty and growth could still thrive if given the chance. This realization sparked something within him. That evening, after finishing his work in the garden, Ananda sat in meditation. He imagined his mind as the garden, visualizing each negative thought as a weed. He gently but firmly pulled them out one by one: the fear of failure, the lingering anger from past slights, the self-criticism that whispered he wasn't good enough. At first, the process was exhausting. Each weed seemed to bring another in its wake, and Ananda realized how long he had let them grow unchecked. But with each moment of mindfulness, he felt lighter, freer. The silence of the monastery at night became his ally, a canvas upon which he could repaint his inner world with calmness and clarity. By the third day, the garden began to transform. The once barren soil was ready for new life, and Ananda began planting seeds: flowers for beauty, vegetables for nourishment, herbs for healing. As he worked, He reflected on what he wanted to cultivate in his mind. What seeds am I planting today? He asked himself. Patience, gratitude, compassion, confidence. These became the focus of his meditations. Each positive thought, like a seed, dropped into the soil of his heart. With care and attention, he believed they would grow stronger than any weed. On the fourth day, Master Suddha came to check on Ananda's progress. The transformation was remarkable. The garden, though not yet in full bloom, was orderly and full of potential. The weeds were gone, replaced by neatly planted rows of flowers and crops. The master nodded approvingly. "Your work here reflects the work you've done within," he said. "Tell me, Ananda, what have you learned?" Ananda wiped his hands on his robes and took a deep breath. "I've learned that negativity, like weeds, thrives when ignored. But if I catch it early before it takes root, I can stop it from spreading. And I've learned that a mind, like a garden, must be tended every day. Without care, even the richest soil can turn barren." Master Suddha smiled, his eyes warm. "Good, but remember, the work of guarding your mind is never finished. Just as weeds will always try to return, so too will doubts and fears. Your task is to remain vigilant, pulling them out as soon as they appear." In the days that followed, Ananda made guarding his mind a daily practice. Each morning, as he worked in the garden, he used the time to reflect on his thoughts. Whenever he noticed negativity creeping in, resentment, impatience, self-doubt, he stopped and addressed it. "Why am I feeling this?" he would ask himself. "Is it helping me grow, or is it holding me back?" The simple act of questioning his thoughts gave him the power to choose which ones to nurture and which ones to release. He began to notice the effects in his daily life. Conversations with his fellow students became more harmonious. His meditation grew deeper, and even his interactions with villagers were filled with greater patience and understanding. One day, a group of travelers arrived at the monastery, seeking guidance. They wandered into the garden, marveling at its beauty. "Who tends this place?" one of them asked, running their fingers over a blooming flower. Ananda stepped forward, smiling. "I do," he said. The traveler looked at him with admiration. "It's remarkable," they said, "so full of life and order. What's your secret?" Ananda thought for a moment before replying. "The secret is simple," he said. "I tend to it every day. I remove the weeds before they take over, and I nurture the plants I wish to see grow. The garden is a reflection of my mind. As I care for one, I care for the other." The traveler nodded thoughtfully. "And what happens if you miss a day?" "The weeds will try to return," Ananda admitted. "But I've learned not to despair. I simply begin again. That is the beauty of both the garden and the mind. They are always ready for renewal." By the end of the week, the garden was in full bloom. Vibrant flowers swayed in the breeze, their colors bright against the deep green of the leaves. Rows of vegetables stood tall, promising a bountiful harvest. Villagers who passed by the monastery often stopped to admire the transformation, unaware of the deeper transformation that had occurred within Ananda himself. He no longer feared the weeds, for he understood their nature. Negativity, he realized, would always try to creep in. It was a part of life. But as long as he remained vigilant, choosing to nurture positivity over fear, his inner world would remain a place of growth and beauty. The lesson of the garden stayed with Ananda long after the weeds were gone. It became a metaphor he shared with others. A simple yet profound truth: your mind is a garden. Guard it well, for what you allow to grow will shape your life. And as Ananda continued his journey, he carried this truth with him, tending to his thoughts each day with care, patience, and love. 6. Face fear and shame. The dense forest surrounding the monastery had always felt like a place of mystery and wonder to Ananda. Its towering trees, shrouded in mist, seemed alive with whispers of nature. But on this particular day, as he ventured deeper into its heart to gather firewood, the forest transformed into something far more menacing. It happened suddenly, As Ananda stepped into a small clearing, a movement in the underbrush caught his eye. He froze. A massive snake, its scales glinting in the filtered sunlight, slithered onto the path in front of him. Its eyes, cold and unblinking, locked onto his. The snake coiled slightly, its tongue flicking in and out as if tasting his fear. Ananda's heart thundered in his chest. His breath caught in his throat, and every instinct screamed at him to run. His legs felt as though they had turned to stone, but his mind raced. What if it bites me? What if I can't outrun it? What if this is the end? Before he could act on his panic, a familiar voice broke through the cacophony of his thoughts. Ananda, Master Suddha called out calmly, stepping into the clearing from a nearby path. His presence was steady, unshaken, like the roots of the forest itself. Why do you let your fear control you? Master, Ananda stammered, his eyes never leaving the snake. It's dangerous. If I move, it might attack. Master Suddha took a step closer, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression serene. Fear, Ananda, is a creation of your mind. It grows from your thoughts, not from the reality before you. Face it with courage, and you will see its true nature. Ananda wanted to protest, to shout that the danger was real, that this was not the time for a lesson. But something in the master's voice rooted him to the spot, compelling him to stay. Trembling, Ananda steadied his breath and forced himself to observe the snake. He noticed its movements slow, deliberate, unthreatening. The snake was not coiled to strike, but simply passing through, its tongue flicking lazily as it tested the air. For what felt like an eternity, Ananda remained still, his fear slowly giving way to a strange curiosity. The snake, seemingly uninterested in him, slithered across the path and disappeared into the underbrush. When the forest fell silent once more, Ananda exhaled deeply, his body shaking from the release of tension. He turned to Master Suddha, who stood watching him with a faint smile. See, the master said, the snake was not your enemy, your fear was, and like all fears, it lost its power when you confronted it. Over the following days, Ananda found himself reflecting on the encounter. The fear he had felt was unlike anything he had experienced before, raw, visceral, consuming. Yet when he faced it, when he chose not to flee, it had dissolved like mist under the morning sun. He began to wonder, what other fears have I been running from? Master Suddha seemed to sense this internal struggle, as he often did. One evening, as the students gathered under the Bodhi tree for their evening lesson, he addressed the group. Fear and shame, he began, are powerful illusions. They are not born of the world around you but of the stories you tell yourself. A snake on the path is just a snake, but in your mind, it becomes a monster. Ananda listened intently, the memory of the snake vivid in his mind. The master continued, and what of shame? It is fear turned inward, the fear that you are not enough, that others will see your flaws and reject you. But like fear, shame is a story. Meet it with understanding, and you will see it for what it is, an illusion. The next morning, Master Suddha gave Ananda a task. You will travel to the village today, he said, handing him a small bundle of scrolls. These contain messages for the villagers. Deliver them, and observe what thoughts arise within you. Ananda was puzzled but obeyed. As he made his way to the village, he became increasingly self-conscious. The villagers were known for their bluntness, and Ananda could already imagine their reactions. They'll mock me, he thought. They'll ask why someone like me, a student of the monastery, is doing such a mundane task. They'll see my shortcomings, my inadequacies. By the time he reached the village, his face was flushed, and his palms were clammy. As he approached the first house, he hesitated, his shame bubbling to the surface. What if they laugh? What if they think I'm weak? But then he remembered the snake. He remembered how his fear had dissolved when he chose to face it. Taking a deep breath, Ananda knocked on the door. The villager who answered greeted him warmly. taking the scroll with a smile and thanking him for his effort. Ananda blinked, surprised. There was no mockery, no judgment, only gratitude. As he continued his task, he began to see how much of his shame was self-imposed. The villagers were busy with their own lives, their own struggles. They had little time to dwell on his perceived flaws. By the time Ananda returned to the monastery, he felt lighter, as though he had shed a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. Later that evening, Ananda approached Master Suddha. "Master," he said, "today I saw how much of my shame comes from within. I feared judgment that was never there. I created stories in my mind, and they blinded me to the truth." The master nodded. "Exactly, Ananda. Fear and shame are rooted in the same soil, the soil of illusion. They grow when you water them with attention, but when you meet them with understanding, they wither." "But Master," Ananda asked, "how can I stop them from growing in the first place?" "You cannot stop fear and shame from appearing," Master Suddha said. "They are natural responses to uncertainty and imperfection, but you can choose how you respond to them. Instead of feeding them, observe them. Ask yourself, what is the truth here? What am I afraid of? And why?" In this way, you disarm them. In the weeks that followed, Ananda practiced this lesson diligently. Whenever fear or shame arose, he paused to examine it. If he felt fear before attempting a difficult task, he asked himself, "What am I truly afraid of? Failure? Judgment? And if so, why does that matter?" If he felt shame about a mistake, he reminded himself that imperfection was part of being human. One day, as he was meditating by the river, a fellow student approached him, looking troubled. "Ananda," the student said, "I made a mistake during the morning chants, and I've been embarrassed all day. Everyone must think I'm a fool." Ananda looked at him kindly. "Do you think they are dwelling on it?" he asked. "Or is it only you?" The student hesitated. "I suppose it's just me." "Then let it go," Ananda said. "Your shame is like a shadow. It cannot touch you unless you let it. Learn from your mistake, but do not carry it with you." The student nodded slowly, a look of relief spreading across his face. Through these experiences, Ananda came to understand that fear and shame were not enemies to be vanquished, but teachers to be understood. Each time he faced them, they lost a little more of their power, until they became mere whispers in the background of his mind. And in their place grew courage, resilience, and self-compassion. Master Suddha watched Ananda's transformation with quiet pride. "You have learned an important truth," he told him one evening. "Fear and shame are illusions, but they are also opportunities. Each time you meet them with understanding, you grow stronger, and in that strength, you find freedom." Ananda bowed deeply, his heart filled with gratitude. The path was still long, but he now walked it with a new sense of confidence, knowing that no fear or shame could hold him back. 7. Learn from everyone. One humid afternoon, Ananda traveled to a nearby riverbank to collect water for the monastery. The sun was high, its rays glinting off the rippling surface of the river. As Ananda approached, he noticed a fisherman crouched by the water's edge, grumbling as he untangled his nets. The man's face was weathered, etched with deep lines that spoke of years of toil and hardship. When Ananda greeted him with a polite bow, the fisherman barely looked up. "What do you want?" he snapped, his voice gruff and irritated. "I mean no harm," Ananda replied gently. "I've come to collect water for the monastery." The fisherman snorted. "The monastery? Bah, useless fools. The lot of you, sitting on that hill, doing nothing while the rest of us work ourselves to death. What good do your prayers and chants do for the real world?" The insult stung, but Ananda had learned to pause before reacting, instead of allowing anger or hurt to take root. He steadied his breath and looked at the man with curiosity. The fisherman's bitterness was palpable, but beneath it, Ananda sensed something deeper, something heavy and unspoken. Life on the river must be difficult, Ananda said after a moment, his tone thoughtful. You must work very hard to provide for your family. The fisherman hesitated, surprised by Ananda's response. Hard? He muttered, his hands tightening around the nets. You wouldn't know the meaning of the word. Perhaps not, Ananda admitted, but I would like to understand. Will you tell me about it? The fisherman blinked, caught off guard by the monk's genuine interest. For a moment, he seemed torn between dismissing Ananda and answering, but something in Ananda's calm demeanor softened his resistance. With a sigh, he sat back on his heels and began to speak. As the fisherman talked, the bitterness in his voice gave way to sorrow. He told Ananda about his wife, who had passed away the previous year, leaving him to care for their young son. She was the light of my life, he said, his voice trembling. Since she's been gone, everything feels harder. The river, the nets, even breathing. Ananda listened intently, his heart aching for the man. He didn't interrupt or offer advice. He simply allowed the fisherman to unburden himself. As the man spoke, Ananda realized that the fisherman's anger wasn't directed at him or the monastery. It was a manifestation of his grief, a shield he had built to protect himself from the vulnerability of his pain. When the fisherman finished, he looked at Ananda with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Why do you care about any of this? He asked gruffly. You don't know me. Ananda met the man's gaze. Because we are all connected, he said simply. Your pain is not yours alone. It touches everyone around you, just as your joy would. By listening to you, I've learned something important. The fisherman frowned. Learned? What could I possibly teach a monk? You've taught me compassion, Ananda said. You've reminded me that anger often hides deeper pain, and that the best response is not to argue, but to understand. For that, I thank you. The fisherman stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a curt nod, he turned back to his nets. But as Ananda walked away, he thought he saw a glimmer of something new in the man's eyes, something softer, less burdened. When Ananda returned to the monastery, he recounted the encounter to Master Suddha. The master listened with a serene smile, his eyes gleaming with approval. Master, Ananda said, I now see that even the most difficult people are teachers. The fisherman's anger taught me compassion and patience. His pain reminded me to look beyond appearances and see the humanity in everyone. Master Suddha nodded. Every person you meet, Ananda, can teach you something if you are willing to learn. The wise do not seek teachers only in temples and books. They find them in the everyday moments, in the people others overlook. The lesson stayed with Ananda, shaping how he approached others. He began to see every interaction, no matter how challenging, as an opportunity for growth. When a fellow student criticized his meditation technique, instead of feeling defensive, Ananda asked for clarification. The student's feedback helped him refine his practice. When a villager dismissed the monastery's teachings as useless, Ananda listened without judgment, learning more about the man's struggles and perspectives. Over time, Ananda's openness drew people to him. Villagers who had once viewed him with skepticism now sought him out, sharing their stories and seeking his counsel. Each encounter deepened his understanding of human nature, revealing the complexities that lay beneath even the harshest words or coldest expressions. One day, as Ananda worked in the monastery garden, a young boy approached him, clutching a tattered basket. The boy's face was smudged with dirt, and his clothes were threadbare. Sir, the boy said hesitantly, can you spare some food? My family has none. Ananda knelt to the boy's level, his heart aching at the sight of him. Of course, he said. He handed the boy a ripe mango from the garden, then asked, what is your name? Chandan. The boy replied, his voice barely above a whisper. And how long has your family been struggling? Chandan, Ananda asked gently. Chandan hesitated, then began to speak, his words spilling out in a torrent. He told Ananda about his father's injury, which had left him unable to work, and about his mother's tireless efforts to provide for the family. As the boy talked, Ananda saw not just the surface of his poverty, but the strength and resilience beneath it. When the boy finished, Ananda placed a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for sharing your story with me, Chandan," he said. "You've taught me something important." The boy frowned. "Taught you? How?" "You've reminded me of the strength it takes to face hardship with courage," Ananda said, "and of the importance of helping others when we can. Your family's struggles have made you wise beyond your years." Chandan's eyes brightened, and he stood a little taller. "Thank you, sir," he said before running off, the mango clutched tightly in his hands. That evening, Ananda reflected on the day's events. He realized that learning from others required more than just listening. It required humility. To learn, he had to set aside his assumptions and see the world through the eyes of those he encountered. Whether it was a grieving fisherman, a critical student, or a hungry boy, each person had something valuable to teach him. When he shared these thoughts with Master Suddha, the master smiled. "You are beginning to understand the true nature of wisdom, Ananda," he said. "It is not found in isolating yourself or believing you know all the answers. It is found in the willingness to learn from everyone and everything, even the difficult moments and the challenging people." Over time, Ananda's practice of learning from everyone transformed not only his relationships but also his inner world. He became more patient, more empathetic, and more attuned to the struggles of those around him. Each encounter, no matter how small, became an opportunity for growth, a stepping stone on his journey toward wisdom. Through these lessons, Ananda came to see that the world itself was a teacher, and that the path to understanding lay not in rejecting others, but in embracing them with an open heart and a curious mind. 8. Live by an ethical code. One morning, Master Suddha called Ananda to the Bodhi tree, its ancient roots stretching deep into the earth. Unshaken by the strongest winds, the master gestured toward the massive tree. "What keeps this tree standing, Ananda?" he asked. "The roots," Ananda replied. "They hold it steady, no matter the storm." Master Suddha nodded. "And so it is with life. Without strong roots, even the tallest tree will fall. Today, I will teach you the 5 principles that will be your roots. Principles to live by when the world's storms threaten your peace." The master held up his hand, counting off each principle with his fingers. "Do no harm, be honest, respect others, avoid excess, keep your mind clear. These principles are your foundation. They are not mere rules to follow but truths to embody. Deep roots will keep you steady during the fiercest storms." Ananda bowed deeply, committing the principles to memory. He understood their significance but knew that embodying them fully would be a journey. 1. Do no harm. The first principle, do no harm, became a guide for Ananda's actions. It extended beyond refraining from physical violence. It shaped how he spoke, thought, and behaved toward others. He began to notice how even subtle actions, a dismissive word, a harsh glance could cause harm. One day, as Ananda was sweeping the courtyard, another student accidentally knocked over a vase of water Ananda had set aside for his work. The water spilled across the ground, undoing hours of effort. For a moment, anger bubbled within Ananda. His instinct was to lash out, to demand more care from his peer. But he paused, recalling the principle, do no harm. Instead of letting his anger guide him, he took a deep breath. "It's all right," he said softly. "Mistakes happen." The student apologized profusely, his relief evident. Ananda realized that by choosing kindness over anger, he had spared not only the other student's feelings but also his own peace of mind. 2. Be honest. The second principle, be honest, challenged Ananda to confront not only the lies he might tell others but also the lies he told himself. He realized how often he avoided uncomfortable truths, convincing himself of things that felt easier to accept but were far from reality. One afternoon, Master Suddha asked Ananda about his progress in meditation. Ananda hesitated, tempted to exaggerate his achievements to gain the master's approval. But he stopped himself. "Be honest." Instead, he confessed, "Master, my mind still wanders often. I struggle to stay focused." To his surprise, Master Suddha smiled warmly. "Good," he said. "Honesty is the first step toward improvement. When you see the truth clearly, you can begin to work with it." Ananda felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Honesty, he realized, was not about perfection but about clarity. By facing the truth, he could grow. 3. Respect others. The third principle, respect others, required Ananda to see every person as worthy of dignity, regardless of their behavior or status. This was often tested when dealing with villagers who dismissed the monastery's teachings or students who struggled with their discipline. One day, Ananda encountered a beggar at the gates of the monastery. The man was unkempt and reeked of alcohol, and several students turned him away, saying he was not deserving of help. But Ananda stopped and offered the man water and food. "Why do you waste your time on him?" one student asked later. "He won't change," Ananda replied. "Respect is not about what others deserve. It is about who we choose to be." The words stayed with the student, and over time, the lesson of respect began to ripple through the monastery. 4. Avoid excess. The fourth principle, avoid excess, taught Ananda the importance of balance. He began to notice how desires, when left unchecked, could lead to dissatisfaction. Whether it was the temptation to overeat, overwork, or indulge in comfort, excess always left him feeling restless. One evening, after a long day of chores, Ananda found himself craving an extra portion of rice from the communal kitchen. The hunger wasn't physical but emotional, a craving for comfort after a tiring day. He paused, reflecting on the principle. Avoid excess. Taking more than he needed would not bring him peace. It would only fuel his desires. Instead, Ananda chose to sit with the feeling of discomfort, observing it without judgment. To his surprise, the craving passed, leaving him with a sense of calm. He realized that by resisting excess, he had strengthened his self-discipline. 5. Keep your mind clear. The final principle, keep your mind clear, became the foundation of Ananda's practice. He began to see how distractions, anger, fear, envy, clouded his thoughts and led him away from peace. One morning, as Ananda meditated by the river, he noticed a student nearby muttering angrily about a disagreement from the previous day. The student's frustration was palpable, disrupting the serene environment. Ananda approached him gently. "Your anger is like mud stirred up in water," he said. "It clouds your vision and prevents you from seeing clearly. Let it settle, and you will find clarity." The student nodded, taking Ananda's advice to heart. Over time, Ananda found that the practice of keeping his own mind clear also helped him guide others toward clarity. The power of choice. As Ananda lived by the 5 principles, he began to notice a profound change within himself. Each decision became an opportunity to practice the ethical code. And with each choice, he grew stronger. Kindness replaced anger. Honesty replaced avoidance. Respect replaced judgment. Balance replaced excess. And clarity replaced confusion. But the true power of the principles lay in their interconnectedness. They were not isolated rules but a cohesive way of living. By practicing one, Ananda often found himself naturally practicing the others. Choosing kindness over anger, for example, required clarity of mind and respect for others. Avoiding excess deepened his honesty with himself. A test of principles. One day, a group of merchants arrived at the monastery, seeking advice from Master Suddha. Among them was a wealthy man who scoffed at the simple lives of the monks. "You waste your time on lofty ideals," the man said, sneering. "Life is about power, wealth, and pleasure. Your principles are nothing more than chains." Ananda felt a flicker of anger at the man's words but quickly reminded himself of the first principle. do no harm. Instead of arguing, he listened calmly. "Why do you see them as chains?" he asked. "Because they limit you," the man replied. "You deny yourself the pleasures of life for the sake of some higher ideal. What's the point?" Ananda thought for a moment before responding. "A boat cannot sail without an anchor," he said. "The principles we live by are not chains but roots. They ground us, allowing us to grow without being swept away by the storms of desire and greed. Without them, we would drift endlessly, never finding peace." The man fell silent, the weight of Ananda's words settling over him. The strength of deep roots. Over time, Ananda came to see the 5 principles not as restrictions but as freedoms. By living ethically, he was no longer a prisoner to his impulses or the opinions of others. The principles became a source of strength, grounding him during life's challenges and guiding him toward inner peace. One evening, as Ananda meditated under the Bodhi tree, Master Suddha approached him. "You have tended well to your roots, Ananda," the master said, "and like this tree, you have grown strong. Remember, storms will come, but those who live by their principles will stand firm, no matter the wind." 9. Live in harmony with nature. One crisp autumn morning, as the sun bathed the hills in golden light, Master Suddha led Ananda down a narrow path to the river. The air was cool, carrying the earthy scent of fallen leaves, and the soft crunch of their footsteps harmonized with the gentle murmur of the water ahead. When they reached the riverbank, the master stopped, gesturing to the clear, glistening stream. "Watch the water," Master Suddha said, his voice low and calm. "See how it flows." Ananda knelt by the river, his eyes following the current. The water moved effortlessly, winding around rocks and branches, always finding its way forward. No matter the obstacle, the river did not stop or resist. It adjusted, bending and curving with the terrain, yet always remaining true to its course. "Be like the river," the master continued. "It does not fight the stones in its path, nor does it cling to the fallen leaves it carries. It simply flows, embracing each moment and every obstacle as part of its journey." Ananda sat in silence, absorbing the lesson. He thought of the times he had resisted change, clung to old pains, or fought against challenges with frustration. The river, in its quiet persistence, seemed to offer a different way of being, one of acceptance, adaptability, and grace. Learning to flow. In the days that followed, Ananda began to practice the river's lesson. Whenever life presented challenges, he paused to consider how he might flow around them instead of resisting. One evening, while meditating, he recalled a recent argument with a fellow student over a chore. At the time, he had felt the need to defend his position, to prove himself right. But now, reflecting on the river, he wondered, what if I had let it go? What if I had flowed past the argument instead of clinging to it? The thought brought a sense of lightness, as if a weight had been lifted. Ananda resolved to carry this mindset into his daily life, adapting to difficulties instead of meeting them with resistance. Embracing change, autumn deepened, and the once vibrant leaves began to fall, carpeting the ground in shades of red and gold. Ananda noticed how the trees let go of their leaves without hesitation, making way for the stillness of winter. There was no resistance, no clinging, only an acceptance of the natural cycle of life. Inspired, Ananda began to reflect on his own relationship with change. He realized how often he had resisted it, holding onto the past out of fear or comfort. But nature seemed to whisper a different truth. Change is not the end. It is a transformation, a step in the rhythm of life. One afternoon, while helping to gather firewood, Ananda came across an old tree stump. The surface was rough and weathered, but from its center sprouted a cluster of vibrant green shoots. Life, Ananda realized, was always renewing itself, even in the face of endings. The tree stump was not a symbol of loss, but of resilience and rebirth. The joy of simplicity. Living in harmony with nature also taught Ananda to find joy in simplicity. He began to notice the beauty of small, everyday moments, the way sunlight filtered through the trees, the sound of wind rustling the leaves, the feel of cool water on his hands as he drew it from the well. These moments, once overlooked, became treasures that filled him with quiet happiness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ananda sat by the river, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. The simplicity of the scene brought tears to his eyes. For so long, he had sought joy in grand achievements or external validation. But now he saw that it had been within reach all along, hidden in the present moment, facing life's storms. One stormy afternoon, the river swelled with rain, its once gentle current now roaring with power. Ananda watched from the safety of the monastery, marveling at the river's transformation. Though its flow was fierce, it remained true to its path, carrying debris and surging past obstacles without hesitation. The storm reminded Ananda of the times in his own life when emotions had raged like the river. Moments of anger, grief, or fear, but just as the river eventually calmed, so too could he find stillness if he allowed his emotions to flow instead of resisting them. That evening, Ananda shared his reflections with Master Suddha. The river does not fight the storm, he said. It allows itself to swell and rage, knowing that calm will return. I see now that I must do the same with my emotions, acknowledge them, let them flow, and trust that peace will follow. The master nodded, his eyes gleaming with approval. You are learning the art of living in harmony. Ananda, to resist life storms is to invite suffering, but to flow with them is to find peace. Interconnectedness. Through his time with nature, Ananda also began to understand the interconnectedness of all things. The river, the trees, the wind, they were not separate but part of a larger whole, each influencing and supporting the other. The river nourished the trees, which in turn sheltered the riverbanks, and the wind carried seeds that would grow into new life. This realization deepened Ananda's sense of responsibility toward the world around him. He saw that his actions, no matter how small, rippled outward, just as a single drop of rain could create ripples in the river. With this awareness, he began to live more mindfully, choosing words and actions that nurtured harmony rather than discord. A test of harmony. One day, while walking along the riverbank, Ananda encountered a group of villagers arguing over the placement of a new well. Their voices were raised, their tempers flaring like a storm. Ananda approached quietly, observing the scene. Instead of taking sides, he listened to each person's concerns, acknowledging their fears and frustrations. Then, drawing on the river's lesson, he offered a solution that flowed around the obstacles, a compromise that met the needs of all involved. The villagers, surprised by his calm demeanor and thoughtful approach, agreed to the plan. As they dispersed, one of them turned to Ananda and said, "You've brought peace to our quarrel. How did you remain so calm?" Ananda smiled. "I simply listened and flowed with the current of your concerns, rather than fighting against them. Like the river, peace comes when we adapt instead of resist." A life in harmony. As Ananda continued to live in harmony with nature, he found that life's challenges no longer felt like barriers but opportunities for growth. The river taught him adaptability, the trees taught him resilience, and the cycles of the seasons taught him acceptance. With each lesson, he felt more connected to the world around him and more at peace within himself. Through this harmony, Ananda discovered a profound truth. Life's beauty lies not in control, but in surrendering to the flow, to the rhythms of nature, and to the present moment. 10. Weaponize gratitude. It was a night of relentless rain, the kind that seemed to soak not just the earth but the very spirit. The howling wind rattled the wooden shutters of the monastery, and the rhythmic drumming of rain on the roof filled the meditation hall. Ananda sat cross-legged on the stone floor, his body still but his mind restless. Doubt and frustration churned within him, each thought a gust of wind stirring the storm in his heart. Why am I not progressing faster? Ananda wondered. Why does peace feel so elusive? even after all these lessons. The questions gnawed at him, growing louder with each passing moment. His breath quickened, his chest tightened. He felt trapped, as though he were battling a storm not outside, but within. Suddenly, a warm hand rested on his shoulder. Ananda opened his eyes to see Master Suddha standing beside him, his gaze steady and filled with quiet understanding. "Ananda," the master said softly, "I sense a storm in your heart. When the darkness feels overwhelming, there is a simple tool you can use to find your way back to the light." Ananda looked up, desperate for guidance. "What is it, Master?" "Gratitude," Suddha replied. "Think of 3 things you are grateful for. Let them be your anchor." The power of gratitude. First, Ananda resisted. His frustration seemed too great, his doubts too loud, but he trusted his master's wisdom. So he closed his eyes and began to search his heart. Slowly, like the first rays of sunlight breaking through heavy clouds, 3 thoughts emerged. The warmth of the fire, he thought, glancing at the flames flickering in the nearby hearth. They had shielded him from the cold, offering comfort on this stormy night. The kindness of my teacher, he realized, feeling the weight of the master's hand still resting gently on his shoulder. Suddha's unwavering support had guided him through every trial. "The lessons I have learned," he thought finally, recalling the wisdom he had gained through his struggles. Each challenge had shaped him, bringing him closer to understanding. As these thoughts took root, Ananda felt a profound shift within him. The storm in his mind began to calm, its winds replaced by a gentle breeze. His chest lightened, and for the first time that night, he felt at peace. "Gratitude," Master Suddha said, as though reading Ananda's thoughts, "is your shield. Use it to transform darkness into light, doubt into clarity, and frustration into strength." Practicing gratitude daily. The next morning, as the storm clouds cleared, Ananda resolved to make gratitude a daily practice. Each morning, before beginning his tasks, he paused to reflect on 3 things he was thankful for. First, it was easy to name the obvious blessings: the beauty of the sunrise, the companionship of his fellow students, the nourishing meals prepared in the monastery kitchen. But as the days passed, Ananda began to look deeper. He realized he could be grateful for challenges, for they taught him resilience. He could be grateful for mistakes, for they revealed areas where he could grow. He could even be grateful for the fleeting nature of life, for it made each moment more precious. One afternoon, while working in the garden, a thorn pricked his finger. Pain flared, and his first instinct was to curse the thorn. But then he paused, remembering his practice. "What can I be grateful for here?" he wondered. He looked at the thorn bush, its blossoms vibrant and fragrant. "The beauty of the flowers is worth the thorns," he thought. The pain in his finger faded, replaced by a quiet smile. Gratitude in adversity. The true test of Ananda's practice came during difficult times. One evening, while carrying a heavy bucket of water, he slipped on a patch of mud, spilling the water and twisting his ankle. Frustration bubbled up immediately. The pain, the wasted effort, it all felt unfair. But then he remembered Master Suddha's words. Gratitude is your shield. Sitting on the ground, nursing his ankle, Ananda forced himself to find 3 things to be thankful for. The bucket did not break, he thought, realizing the task could still be completed later. The cool evening air feels refreshing, he noticed, his focus shifting away from the pain. This is an opportunity to practice patience, he concluded, knowing that setbacks were part of the journey. By the time he rose to his feet, the frustration had melted away, replaced by a calm acceptance. Gratitude had transformed his perspective, turning an inconvenience into a lesson, teaching others. As Ananda's practice deepened, his gratitude became a source of inspiration for those around him. Fellow students often approached him, seeking advice on how to handle their own frustrations. One evening, a young monk named Ravi came to Ananda, his face flushed with anger. "I was assigned to clean the meditation hall today," Ravi said, But halfway through, another student spilled ink on the floor. Hours of work. Ruined. How am I supposed to feel anything but anger? Ananda listened patiently, then asked, "What can you be grateful for in this situation?" Ravi frowned. "Grateful? How can I be grateful for this?" "Think," Ananda urged gently. "The answer is always there." After a long pause, Ravi sighed. "Well, I suppose I'm grateful that the spill can be cleaned. And I'm grateful that I learned to be more careful with my own tasks." Ananda nodded. "Exactly. Gratitude doesn't erase the challenges, but it gives us the strength to face them with clarity and peace." Ravi's expression softened, and he bowed in thanks before returning to his duties. Gratitude as a weapon. Master Suddha often reminded the students that gratitude was not just a practice but a powerful weapon. "Life will bring storms," he said one evening, addressing the group under the glow of lantern light. "Doubt, anger, and despair will come for you, like armies seeking to conquer your mind. But gratitude is your sword and shield. It cuts through negativity and defends your peace." Ananda took these words to heart, carrying them with him through every trial. He began to see gratitude not as passive contentment but as active resistance against the forces of darkness. When doubt whispered that he was not good enough, gratitude reminded him of his progress. When frustration threatened to overwhelm him, gratitude brought him back to the present moment, where joy could still be found. The ripple effect. As Ananda practiced gratitude, he noticed how it affected not only his inner world but also the world around him. His calm demeanor and positive outlook inspired his fellow monks, who began to adopt the practice themselves. Even the villagers, who once viewed the monastery with skepticism, started to seek Ananda's counsel, drawn to the lightness he carried. One day, an elderly villager approached Ananda, her face lined with worry. "My harvest failed this season," she said. "I don't know how I'll feed my family." Ananda placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said sincerely. "But tell me, is there anything you are grateful for, even now?" The woman thought for a long moment before replying. "My neighbor shared some of his crops with me, and my children are healthy." Ananda smiled. "Hold on to that gratitude. It will give you strength to face the challenges ahead." The woman nodded, her burden seeming lighter as she walked away. Gratitude transforms the self. Over time, Ananda realized that gratitude had not only transformed his perspective but also his very being. He no longer saw life's challenges as obstacles but as opportunities for growth. He no longer took the small joys of life for granted but cherished them as treasures. One evening, as he meditated under the stars, Ananda reflected on his journey. The doubts and frustrations that had once plagued him now felt distant, like a storm that had passed. In their place was a deep sense of peace, rooted in the practice of gratitude. For Ananda, gratitude was more than a shield. It was a way of life, a light that illuminated even the darkest paths. And as he continued his journey, he carried that light with him, sharing its warmth with all who crossed his path. Years later, when Ananda returned to his village, it was as though he had become an entirely different person. The restless, burden seeker who had left years before was now a man of quiet confidence and radiant peace. The villagers, who remembered him as a young man filled with doubt, were struck by his transformation. "What changed you, Ananda?" they asked. "What did you learn in your time away?" Ananda smiled gently and invited them to sit under the shade of the great banyan tree. There, he shared the 10 principles that had shaped his journey, explaining how each had guided him toward the peace he now carried within. 1. Find your purpose. "When I left the village," Ananda began, "I was adrift. I didn't know what I was searching for, only that something felt missing. Master Suddha taught me the importance of finding a purpose, a North Star to guide me." He explained how the act of defining his values and aspirations had given his life direction. "Your purpose isn't something you find outside of yourself," he said. "It's a reflection of what truly matters to you. When life feels overwhelming, Returning to your purpose is like looking at a map when you've lost your way. The villagers nodded, some already reflecting on their own lives. Ananda added, "Purpose doesn't have to be grand, can be as simple as being kind, providing for your family, or creating something meaningful. What matters is that it aligns with your heart." 2. Control your reactions. Ananda recounted the times when anger and fear had controlled him, how he had once been quick to react when others mocked or insulted him. "Master Suddha taught me that no one can harm you without your consent," he said. "When you let their words or actions dictate your emotions, you give them power over you." He described how he had learned to pause, breathe, and choose his response. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, "but I came to see that reacting with anger or frustration only added fuel to the fire. By staying calm, I kept my peace intact." A villager spoke up, "But what if someone truly wrongs you? How do you not react?" Ananda smiled. "It doesn't mean you accept injustice. It means you approach it with clarity and strength, not with rage. Reacting without thought clouds your judgment, but responding with calm gives you control." 3. Transform insults. Ananda shared the story of the fisherman who had insulted him and how, instead of arguing, he had listened and learned about the man's grief. "When someone insults you," Ananda said, "it's often more about their pain than about you. If you can meet their words with compassion instead of defensiveness, you'll discover that insults lose their power." He explained how every harsh word became an opportunity to practice patience and understanding. "I learned that the greatest strength lies in turning anger into empathy," he said. "In doing so, you free yourself from resentment." 4. Rise above gossip. Gossip, Ananda continued, is like smoke. It may cloud the air for a while, but it cannot harm you unless you let it consume you. He told the villagers about the rumors that had once surrounded him at the monastery and how he had chosen to focus on his actions rather than the words of others. "Master Suddha taught me that the truth will always reveal itself in time. By staying true to my values and letting my actions speak louder than their words, I rose above the gossip." One of the villagers asked, "But how do you stop worrying about what others think?" Ananda replied, "By understanding that their opinions are not your truth. You are not defined by what others say about you, but by how you live." 5. Guard your mind. Ananda compared the mind to a garden. "Negativity is like weeds," he said. "If you don't tend to them, they'll overrun the garden. But if you nurture positive thoughts, they'll flourish and bring beauty to your life." He explained how he had learned to recognize negative thoughts and gently let them go, replacing them with gratitude, hope, and kindness. "It's not about ignoring difficulties," he said. "It's about choosing what you allow to grow in your mind." 6. Face fears. Ananda told the villagers about the time he had stood frozen before a snake in the forest and how Master Suddha had encouraged him to face it instead of fleeing. "Fear," he said, "is often an illusion, a story we tell ourselves. When you face it with courage, it loses its power." He encouraged the villagers to confront their fears, whether they were physical, emotional, or mental. "Each time you face a fear, you grow stronger," he said, "and each time you avoid it, the fear grows stronger instead." 7. Learn from everyone. Even the most difficult people can teach us something, Ananda said. He shared the lesson he had learned from the fisherman who had criticized him. "He taught me compassion," Ananda said. "His anger wasn't about me. It was about his own grief." He urged the villagers to approach others with curiosity and empathy. "Every person you meet is a teacher," he said. "If you are willing to listen, you will learn something valuable." 8. Live ethically. Ananda recited the 5 principles Master Suddha had taught him. "Do no harm, be honest, respect others, avoid excess, and keep your mind clear. These principles became the roots of my life," he said. "By living ethically, I found stability and peace, even in difficult times." One villager asked, "But what if someone treats you unfairly?" Should you still follow these principles? Yes, Ananda replied. Living ethically is not about how others treat you. It's about staying true to your values. When you act with integrity, you create a foundation that cannot be shaken. 9. Flow with nature. Ananda described how he had learned to live in harmony with life's natural rhythms. The river taught me to adapt, he said. It flows around obstacles, always moving forward, never resisting. He encouraged the villagers to embrace change instead of fighting it. Life is full of seasons, he said. Each season has its own beauty and its own lessons. By flowing with them, you find peace. 10. Embrace gratitude. Finally, Ananda spoke of gratitude as the most powerful tool he had learned. Gratitude is like the sun, he said. It transforms darkness into light. He recounted the night he had struggled with doubt and how Master Suddha had encouraged him to think of 3 things he was grateful for. That simple act changed everything, he said. It calmed the storm in my mind and reminded me of the blessings I already had. He urged the villagers to make gratitude a daily practice. Even in the hardest times, there is always something to be thankful for. He said, gratitude doesn't just change your perspective, it changes your life. As Ananda finished sharing the 10 principles, the villagers sat in thoughtful silence. Each had found something in his words that resonated deeply, a lesson they could carry into their own lives. For Ananda, the act of sharing his journey was not just a reflection of his growth, but also a way to plant seeds of peace in the hearts of those around him. And so, the principles that had guided Ananda on his path became a source of inspiration for many, reminding them that peace is not found in the world outside, it is cultivated within.